I never thought that at 68 years old I would be forced to live in someone else's house, even if that house belongs to my own grandson. Every morning, waking up in my room on the second floor, I would look at the ceiling and remember my old house on Cedar Street, the house that I built with my own hands together with Lydia, my late wife. The house where every floorboard creaked in its own way, where the apple trees in the garden bore so much fruit that we gave half of it to the neighbors. 2 years ago, I sold it. I can't say I regret it, although sometimes at night I am overcome by a strange feeling that I have done something irreparable. Lionel, my grandson, came to me one evening with a gleam in his eyes and a stack of papers, a business plan, as he called it, a small bakery and coffee shop in the city center, a place where they would serve real coffee and fresh pastries. He talked at length about craft varieties, original recipes, and a cozy, homey atmosphere. I don't know much about any of that, but his eyes burned with the same fire that had last burned in his father, my son, when he brought home medals from swimming competitions. "Grandpa, I've never asked you for anything, you know," Lionel said then, "but now I'm asking help me. This is my only chance to start my own business. The bank will only give me half the money I need. I looked at my house, which required more and more attention and effort every year. After Lydia died 5 years ago, I never learned to live alone. It's too big a house for a lonely old man. I'll sell the house," I replied, "and I'll move in with you if you and Heather don't mind. Just temporarily, until I find something suitable." Lionel hugged me so tightly that I felt young and strong again. I didn't regret my decision then, nor do I now. Seeing his business grow and prosper was worth any sacrifice. But sometimes, in moments of weakness, I missed my old home, my independence, and the quiet. 2 years had passed and I was still living with them. Lionel and Heather insisted that I take the spacious bedroom on the second floor with its own bathroom. "We're not going to put you in a closet, Grandpa," Heather said as she helped me arrange my furniture. They moved my old dresser, my desk, even my favorite rocking chair, where I had spent so many evenings with a book and a glass of whiskey. And yet, despite the comfort and coziness they tried to create, I felt like a guest. Lionel is a good guy. He takes after his father, my Thomas. He's just as stubborn, hard-working, and strong-willed. He married Heather 5 years ago, and I was sure he had made the right choice. Heather is a petite woman with freckles on her nose and red hair that she dyes a darker color. She is a florist, used to work in a flower shop, and now has her own section at Lionel's coffee shop. This morning, as usual, I woke up before everyone else. I've had the habit of waking up at 5 in the morning since I worked as a safety inspector at a chemical plant. Even now, 8 years after retiring, my internal alarm clock goes off at 5 sharp. I quietly made my way down to the kitchen, trying not to creak the floorboards. I turned on the coffee maker, the only appliance in this trendy kitchen that I had learned to use without any problems. While the coffee dripped into the cup, I looked out the window at the street, which was still asleep in the pre-dawn twilight. Lionel and Heather's house was in a quiet neighborhood in Decatur, among other neat little houses with small green lawns. Not like my old house with its big garden where I could spend hours tending to the plants. Here, the lawn is so small you could mow it in 15 minutes. "Good morning, Grandpa." Heather's voice made me jump. She was standing in the kitchen doorway wrapped in a bathrobe. "Can't sleep again?" "At my age, sleep is a luxury," I replied, pouring her some coffee. "And why sleep when life is so short?" Heather smiled faintly and took the cup. The dark circles under her eyes showed that she hadn't slept much in the last few days. "How's your flower empire?" I asked, trying to make conversation. "Fine," she said, taking a sip of coffee. "We had a big order for an anniversary yesterday. 50 arrangements in one day is a record." I nodded, not knowing what else to say. Heather and I used to find things to talk about easily. She would ask me about old movies she liked to re-watch or Lydia's recipes she wanted to try. But in recent weeks, It was as if a wall had grown between us. "Is Lionel awake yet?" I asked, breaking the prolonged silence. "He left an hour ago," Heather replied, staring into her cup. "They're delivering new equipment for the coffee shop today. He wanted to be there first thing in the morning." I nodded, feeling a slight pang of disappointment. Lionel always stopped by to say goodbye before leaving for work. "Things are going well for him, right?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. Inspiration, as Lionel's coffee shop was called, had become one of the most popular places in town. It was always crowded on weekends, and the smell of fresh baked goods wafted for several blocks. "Very well," Heather finally looked up at me, "especially this past month. People even started coming from neighboring towns. They say you can't get coffee like this anywhere else." I smiled with pride. My grandson always knew how to get things done, even when everyone else doubted him. I remember how many people tapped their fingers on their temples when they found out that Lionel was opening a coffee shop in a town that already had 5 similar establishments. "I think I'll stop by today," I said. "It's been a while since I've seen how everything is going." Heather suddenly tensed, her fingers tightening around the cup. "Maybe not today. He's got a lot to do with that new equipment. He'll be busy all day." I shrugged, trying to hide my disappointment. "Sure, whatever you say. I don't want to get in the way." Heather quickly came over and put her hand on my shoulder. "You're never in the way, Grandpa. It's just not the best time right now." I nodded, but something in her voice made me wary. Heather was never a good liar. Her eyes always gave her away. After breakfast, Heather left for the flower shop to pick up a new shipment, and I was left alone in the house that had never felt like home, despite all of Lionel and Heather's efforts. I went up to my room and sat down in the rocking chair by the window. From there, I could see the neighbors' yards and a small park in the distance. I took out an old photo album, the only thing I had taken from the house when I left. Photos of Lydia, our wedding, Thomas's birth, his first steps, school graduations, weddings, a photo of all of us together. Me, Lydia, Thomas, and his wife Emily, holding newborn Lionel in our arms. A photo of Lydia and me standing in front of our new house on Cedar Street, so fresh and full of hope. The house now belongs to a young couple with 2 children. I sometimes pass it on the bus and see how they've changed the facade, put up a new swing set in the yard, and planted different flowers. The bus. Another thing I've had to come to terms with. I sold my car along with the house, deciding that at my age it wasn't worth driving anymore. A stupid decision. Without a car, I feel tied to this house, dependent on bus and taxi schedules. My hearing isn't what it used to be. Sometimes I can't make out words, especially when people speak quickly or quietly. Lydia always teased me that I was pretending to be deaf when she asked me to take out the trash, but the truth is, my hearing really has gotten worse. The doctor prescribed a hearing aid a year ago, but I only wear it when I leave the house. Pride prevents me from admitting that I am becoming a helpless old man. Lately, I've noticed that Lionel and Heather often whisper to each other but stop when I enter the room. At first, I didn't think much of it. Young couples talk about all sorts of things. But then I noticed that these conversations were becoming more frequent, and the looks they exchanged, when they thought I wasn't looking, became more intense. Yesterday, I went downstairs to get a glass of water and heard Lionel talking on the phone in the kitchen. He was speaking quietly, but I caught the words, "Everything's ready. He mustn't know, and it'll be a surprise." As soon as I entered the kitchen, he immediately said goodbye and hung up. "Who were you talking to so late?" I asked, pretending I hadn't heard anything. "Oh, it was just the supplier," Lionel replied, avoiding my gaze. "About the new shipment of coffee." I pretended to believe him, but I felt uneasy. What were they hiding from me? Why were there so many secretive conversations lately? That evening, I noticed something else strange. Heather came home later than usual with a large folder of documents which she quickly hid in her bedroom when she saw me in the hallway. When I asked her what the papers were, she just waved her hand and said something about orders for the coffee shop. At dinner, Lionel and Heather were unusually quiet, only occasionally exchanging short phrases about work. I tried to keep the conversation going by talking about a new book I had started reading, but I felt like they were just listening politely, their minds somewhere else. "Is something wrong?" I finally asked when the pause dragged on. No, everything's fine," Lionel replied too quickly. "Just tired today. Lots of work." Heather nodded in agreement, but I noticed her casting a warning glance at him. After dinner, I helped Heather clear the table, and Lionel went into the living room to watch TV. As I passed the living room on my way to my room, I heard Lionel talking on the phone. Yes, everything is going according to plan. No, he doesn't suspect anything. I think we'll be ready in a week. I didn't eavesdrop any further so as not to be noticed, but the alarm bells inside me only grew louder. Something was going on, and I was clearly not in the loop. What plan did Lionel and Heather have that I wasn't supposed to know about? Lying in bed, I couldn't fall asleep for a long time, replaying the events of the last few weeks in my head. Strange phone calls, whispers that stopped when I appeared, worried looks. All these little things added up to some kind of unpleasant picture that I couldn't quite make sense of. Maybe they were having financial problems, but no. Business was booming, and they themselves said that their income was growing every month. Maybe they had health problems they didn't want to discuss with me, or was there something wrong with their relationship? I noticed that lately they had been less affectionate toward each other, at least in front of me. Or maybe the problem was me. Maybe they were tired of me being in their house. After all, we had agreed that I would stay with them temporarily until I found something suitable for myself. But 2 years have passed and I'm still here. What if they're looking for a way to hint that it's time for me to find my own place? The thought made me shiver. I imagined them sitting in the evenings discussing how to delicately hint to the old man that it was time to move out. "Grandpa, have you thought about finding an apartment closer to the city center? It's closer to the coffee shop and the library is nearby." Lionel had dropped a few hints like that over the past few months, but I didn't think much of it. Maybe they weren't just random comments. I tossed and turned late into the night listening to the sounds of the house. Around midnight, I heard Lionel and Heather talking in hushed voices in their bedroom. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was tense, as if they were arguing. Then everything fell silent and the house was quiet. In the morning, I woke up with a heavy feeling. All night long, I had nightmares in which I found myself on the street with a suitcase in my hands, while Lionel and Heather looked at me regretfully from the window of their house. I got up, feeling my back ache. Old injuries have been acting up more and more lately. I put on my robe and left the room, intending to go down to the kitchen for a cup of coffee. In the hallway, I bumped into Heather, who was quickly making her way toward the stairs. When she saw me, she flinched and instinctively hid a piece of paper behind her back. "Good morning, Grandpa," she said with a forced smile. "I thought you were still asleep." "Good morning," I replied, trying not to look at her hands. I decided to get up early. "The weather's nice today. Maybe I'll take a walk to the park." "Great idea," Heather said too quickly. "Lionel's already left for the coffee shop and I'm about to go too. I have a big wedding order today." She quickly passed me and went down the stairs. I heard her drop something into her bag in the hallway, then slam the front door. I was left alone in the quiet house, not understanding what was going on, but sensing that something was definitely wrong. What were those papers Heather had been so careful to hide from me? Why had she and Lionel become so secretive? And most importantly, what did the future hold for me? I went down to the kitchen, turned on the coffee maker, and waited for it to brew my morning coffee. A new day was beginning outside, but I felt uneasy, like I was waiting for a storm. I spent the day in a strange mood. A walk to the park didn't bring any relief. I kept thinking about what Lionel and Heather might be hiding from me. Why all the secrecy, the whispering behind my back? What was on those papers Heather had hidden so hastily that morning? On my way home, I stopped at the Inspiration coffee shop. Lionel's business was obviously thriving. At 2 in the afternoon, all the tables were taken, and there was a small line at the counter of people waiting to get their coffee to go. I saw Lionel behind the coffee machine. He was deftly working the levers and buttons while talking to customers and smiling. Noticing me, he raised his eyebrows in surprise, but immediately smiled and waved. A couple of minutes later, he approached my table with a steaming cup of coffee. "Grandpa, it's good to see you. What brought you here?" "I decided to take a walk and see how you're doing," I replied. "Things seem to be going well, as I can see." "Yes, I can't complain." Lionel sat down opposite me. "We installed a new coffee machine today, so now we can make twice as many orders per hour." I wanted to ask him about the strange conversations, about the papers Heather had been hiding, but something stopped me. Instead, I asked, "Where's Heather?" "She said she had a big wedding order today." For a second, something like panic flashed across Lionel's face. "Yes, she's in her workshop right now." He nodded toward the glass partition behind which flowers and ribbons were visible. "She's very busy today. Better not disturb her." I noticed that Heather wasn't in the workshop, but I didn't mention it to Lionel. After finishing my coffee, I thanked my grandson and headed home. On the way, I wondered why Lionel had lied to me. Where had Heather really gone? At dinner that evening, I noticed the strange tension between them again. They exchanged short replies, avoiding looking at each other, and when I asked a question, they answered too quickly and too cheerfully, as if they had rehearsed their answers in advance. After dinner, I said I wanted to go to bed early and went up to my room. But instead of going to bed, I sat down in a chair by the door and listened to the sounds in the house. At first, I heard Lionel and Heather cleaning up in the kitchen, the clatter of dishes, the sound of running water. Then, everything went quiet, and I figured they had gone to the living room or their bedroom. I was about to go to bed when I heard their voices in the hallway, right outside my door. They were speaking quietly, but in the silence of the house, I could make out their words if I listened carefully. "It's getting very suspicious." Heather's voice sounded worried. "Did you see how he looked at us at dinner?" "Don't worry so much," Lionel replied. "Everything is going according to plan. A few more days and we'll have everything sorted out." "But how long will he be staying here?" Heather's voice sounded clearly irritated. "The renovations are almost finished and we're dragging our feet." I didn't catch Lionel's reply. They must have started down the stairs and the voices faded away. But I had heard enough. My heart was pounding like crazy. How long will he be staying here? Heather's words rang in my ears, so I was right. They were tired of putting up with me in their house. They were waiting for some renovation to be finished so they could kick me out onto the street. Or maybe the renovations had nothing to do with me. Just an excuse to put off an unpleasant conversation. I sat in the dark, feeling waves of resentment and bitterness wash over me. 2 years ago, I sold my house to help my grandson fulfill his dream. I gave him a roof over his head when he was little, and his parents, my son and daughter-in-law, died in that terrible accident. I was both a father and a grandfather to him. And now, with his business thriving and my house long sold, he and his wife are so tired of me that they can't wait for me to leave. I don't know how long I sat there, numb with the pain of betrayal. Maybe an hour, maybe more. The house was completely silent. Lionel and Heather must have gone to bed. I went to the window and looked out at the dark street. Sparse streetlights illuminated the deserted road, and a car drove by in the distance. Then it dawned on me. I wasn't going to wait for them to politely ask me to leave. I would leave on my own right now, in the middle of the night. At least I would preserve what little pride I had left. Let them worry. Let them look for me. Let them feel even a fraction of the pain I was feeling. The decision came suddenly, but with such clarity that there was no room for doubt. I silently took an old travel bag out of the closet, the same one I had moved here with 2 years ago. I packed the essentials, a few changes of clothes, a warm sweater, a razor, a toothbrush, and blood pressure pills, a photo album with family pictures, my wallet with a small amount of cash and my bank card. After changing into my street clothes, I quietly opened the door and listened. The house was asleep. There was no sound coming from Lionel and Heather's bedroom. I carefully descended the stairs, trying not to step on the creaky ones. In the hallway, I put on my shoes and a light coat. Nights in Decatur can be cool even in summer. The door lock clicked too loudly and I froze, waiting for someone to wake up, but the house remained silent. I stepped out onto the porch, quietly closed the door behind me, and took a deep breath. The night air was fresh and cool. A cricket chirped somewhere and stars twinkled in the sky, as bright as they had been 60 years ago when I kissed Lydia for the first time. I walked down the street without looking back at the house where I had lived for the past 2 years. I hadn't decided where to go yet. I just walked forward feeling a strange mixture of bitterness, resentment, and some kind of intoxicating freedom. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a guest who could be politely shown the door at any moment. I made the choice myself. I decided to leave. The streets of Decatur were deserted at this late hour. Rare cars drove by, their headlights momentarily illuminating the figure of an elderly man with a bag walking along the sidewalk, then leaving me in the semi-darkness again. I reached the Central Park and sat down on a bench. My legs were already starting to ache. My age and sedentary lifestyle of recent years were taking their toll. I looked at the dark silhouettes of the trees and wondered what to do next. I didn't have much money, just my pension. It would be enough for a modest room somewhere in a cheap neighborhood, but not for a proper home. What would I do? An old man with no home and no family. Where would I go? It's all my fault, I thought bitterly. I shouldn't have sold the house. I should have helped Lionel in a different way, borrowed money from the bank, mortgaged some of my property, but kept a roof over my head. And now I was left with nothing. No home, no money, no future. Memories flooded back suddenly. I remembered holding newborn Lionel in my arms, teaching him to ride a bike, comforting him when he cried after his parents' funeral. I remembered his first day of school, his graduation, his wedding to Heather. For so many years I had been there for him, his rock, his support. And now that I'm old and frail, when I need support myself, he and his wife want to get rid of me. Stupid old man. I should have known that young people don't want old people around with their illnesses, grumbling, and outdated views on life. I should have been prepared for the fact that one day, even the people closest to me would no longer need me. Sitting on a bench in the park at night, I allowed myself to cry for the first time in a long time. Tears streamed down my cheeks and I didn't wipe them away. No one could see me anyway. I cried about my loneliness, my lost home, the ingratitude, the betrayal, my own stupidity. And when the tears dried up, I felt a strange emptiness, as if something important had gone with them. Then I remembered Perry Hutchins, my old friend who used to work with me at the chemical plant. We hadn't seen each other in 3 years, since the funeral of a mutual acquaintance, but we still talked on the phone from time to time. Perry lived alone in a small house on the outskirts of Decatur. Maybe he'd let me stay with him until I figured out what to do next. I took my old-fashioned push-button phone out of my pocket. I don't like these new smartphones with their touch screens and a million useless features. I found Perry's number in my contacts and wondered if it was too late to call. It was already around midnight, but it was an emergency, and I decided to take the risk. After the 5th ring, the phone was picked up and Perry's sleepy voice mumbled, "Hutchins speaking." "Perry, it's Ambrose. Sorry to call so late." "Ambrose?" Perry sounded surprised. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "Not really. I replied, feeling a lump in my throat. I need help, Perry. Can I come over? Of course, buddy, he replied without hesitation. Do you have a way to get here? Do you want me to come pick you up? No, I'll take a taxi. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Perry gave me his address. I knew roughly where he lived, but I didn't have the exact address. I called a taxi using the app that Lionel had installed on my push-button phone especially for such occasions. Modern technology can be useful sometimes, even though I complain about it. 5 minutes later, the car pulled up. The driver, a young guy with an earpiece, looked at me in surprise. He probably wasn't expecting to see an older man with a bag in the park in the middle of the night. But he didn't ask any questions, just nodded when I gave him the address. All the way there, I looked out the window at the city at night. We drove past familiar places. The movie theater where Lydia and I went on our first date. The school where Thomas went to school. The hospital where Lionel was born. So many memories are connected with this city, and now I'm driving through the night like a fugitive, because my grandson and his wife have decided that I'm interfering with their happiness. The taxi stopped in front of a small one-story house with a neat front yard. The porch light was on, and Perry was standing in the doorway, a stocky man with gray stubble and still thick hair despite being 72 years old. I paid the driver and got out of the car.
Ambrose, you old devil!
Perry came down the steps and gave me a big hug.
What happened? You look terrible.
It's a long story, I replied, feeling a wave of fatigue wash over me. Can I come in? Perry led me into the house. It was clean and cozy, if a little cluttered, the typical home of a single man. On the walls hung photographs of his late wife Eleanor and their son Greg, who now lived somewhere in California. Coffee? Or something stronger? Perry asked, helping me take off my coat. Coffee, if that's okay, I replied, sinking into an armchair. And sorry for waking you up. Perry waved his hand and went into the kitchen. I heard him clattering cups and the coffee maker whirring. A few minutes later, he returned with 2 steaming mugs. Tell me, he said, sitting down across from me. What happened? Did you and Lionel have a fight? I took a sip of hot coffee and felt the warmth spread through my body. And then I began to tell him about how I sold my house to help Lionel open the coffee shop, about how I lived with him and Heather for 2 years, about the strange conversations that fell silent when I appeared, and finally, about what I heard tonight. How long is he going to live here? I repeated Heather's words, feeling a wave of resentment rise again. They're tired of me, Perry. They're tired of sharing their house with an old man. Now that the business is thriving, they don't need me anymore. Perry listened silently without interrupting. When I finished, he stared into his mug for a while, as if the answer to all his questions was in that coffee. And you just left. You didn't talk to them? What is there to talk about? I shook my head. It's obvious. They're tired of living with an old man. The business is doing well, they have money, they can kick the old man out. Don't you think you might have misunderstood something? Perry asked cautiously. Maybe that's not what they meant? What else could "how long will he live here" mean? I smiled bitterly. That doesn't sound like they care about my well-being. It sounds like someone who's tired of waiting for an uninvited guest to finally leave. Perry sighed and put his empty mug on the table. Well, it's not my place to judge. You can stay here as long as you need to. I have a spare room. Greg only comes home for Christmas, if he comes at all. Thanks, buddy, I said, feeling my eyes sting. It's just for a couple of days, until I decide what to do next. Maybe I'll rent a room somewhere, although you can't really live it up on a pension. Don't think about that now, Perry said, getting up. Come on, I'll show you your room. You need to rest. You look exhausted. I followed him down the hallway into a small but cozy room with a single bed, a dresser, and a desk. Rock band posters hung on the walls, probably from when Greg lived there. The bathroom's across the hall, Perry said. Clean towels are in the closet. If you need anything, I'm in the room at the end of the hall. Thanks, I repeated, putting my bag on the floor. Really, thanks. Perry patted me on the shoulder and left, closing the door behind him. I sat down on the edge of the bed and felt exhaustion weigh heavily on my shoulders. The events of the day, the emotional tension, the nighttime walk, it had all worn me out more than I thought. I undressed, got into bed, and stared at the ceiling. Perry's house was quiet, except for the clock in the living room ticking away the seconds, and the occasional creak of the old refrigerator in the kitchen. I thought about Lionel and Heather, about their morning awakening when they discovered I was gone. Would they be worried? Or would they breathe a sigh of relief that the problem had solved itself? With these gloomy thoughts, I fell into a restless sleep, full of vague images and voices, among which Heather's irritated voice rang out again and again. How long is he going to live here? The morning at Perry Hutchins' house began with the smell of freshly brewed coffee and fried bacon. I opened my eyes and didn't immediately realize where I was. Then memories of the previous night came flooding back. The overheard conversation, my hasty departure from the house, the taxi, and Perry's warm welcome. I got up, feeling my joints ache. My age and the uncomfortable bed were taking their toll. After getting dressed, I went into the kitchen, where Perry was working his magic on the stove. "Ah, here's our runaway," he smiled, flipping the eggs. "How did you sleep?" "Fine," I lied. In fact, I tossed and turned for a long time, and when I finally fell asleep, I had nightmares. "Thanks for letting me stay." "Don't mention it." Perry waved his hand. "We're friends. Sit down. Breakfast is almost ready." I sat down at the small kitchen table. Perry put a plate of eggs, bacon, and toast in front of me and poured coffee. He sat down across from me and we ate in silence for a while. "So, what are you planning to do next?" he finally asked. I put down my fork and sighed. "Honestly, I don't know. I acted on impulse without thinking about the consequences. I just couldn't stay there anymore, where I felt like a burden." "Are you sure you understood the situation correctly?" Perry looked at me doubtfully. "Lionel always seemed like a good guy to me. It's hard to believe he wants to get rid of you." "I thought so too," I said, my throat tight with bitterness. "But the facts speak for themselves. Those secret conversations, the whispers that stop when I'm around. And finally, that comment from Heather. How long is he going to live here?" "Isn't it obvious?" Perry chewed thoughtfully on his toast. "You know, Ambrose, sometimes we hear what we're afraid to hear. Maybe you should just ask them directly." I shook my head. "And what would they say?" "Sorry, Grandpa, but you're in our way. Could you find somewhere else to live?" "They just beat around the bush and say I'd misunderstood." "Maybe that's the case. Maybe you really did get it wrong." I took a sip of coffee, avoiding his gaze. Somewhere deep down, I hoped that Perry was right, that I had misread Lionel and Heather's words and actions. But fear and hurt were stronger. "Perry, I don't want to be a burden to you too. I need to gather my thoughts and decide what to do next. I think I'll go back to Lionel's house this afternoon when they're both at work. I want to pick up the rest of my things and the documents from my old house. There are some papers there that might come in handy." "Documents for the house," Perry frowned. "Why do you need them? You sold it." "Yes, but there are copies of the sales contract and my old tax records. I need to prove that I own the property if I want to rent an apartment. Landlords require a credit history." That wasn't the whole truth. I wanted to have all the documents relating to the sale of the house in my possession, so that Lionel couldn't use them against me in any way. Although, of course, it was silly. The deal had long since been finalized, and all the money from the sale had gone toward opening his coffee shop. "I can give you a ride," Perry offered. "I'm off today." "Thanks, but I'd rather drive myself. I'll call a taxi, pick up my things, and come back." Perry shrugged. "As you wish, but keep in mind that my offer to stay here still stands. You can stay as long as you need." I nodded gratefully. After breakfast, I called a taxi and arranged for it to arrive in an hour. That would give me just enough time to get myself together and think about what to do next. Meanwhile, panic reigned in the home of Lionel and Heather Freeman. When they woke up in the morning and didn't find me in the bedroom, the kitchen, or any of the other rooms, they became seriously alarmed. "He never leaves this early without telling us," Heather said, nervously biting her lip, "and he's not answering his phone." Lionel was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he dialed my number for the 10th time. "Maybe he went for a walk and forgot his phone," he suggested, but there was no conviction in his voice. "At 6 in the morning?" Heather shook her head. "And look, his coat is gone, and so is that old bag." They searched my room and found that some things were missing: a change of clothes, toiletries, a photo album. This didn't sound like a normal walk. "Oh my God," Lionel exhaled, realizing what had happened. "He's gone. For good." "But why?" Heather looked at her husband in confusion. "What happened?" Lionel suddenly turned even paler. "Last night, remember we were talking in the hallway, near his room. You asked him how long he was going to stay here. Do you think he could have heard us?" Heather pressed her hand to her mouth. "Oh no, but we were talking about renovating the apartment. Could he have thought—" "He could only have heard part of the conversation." Lionel feverishly searched through his phone, looking through his contacts. "We need to call the police. And his friends. Maybe he's staying with one of them." "But he hardly has any friends," Heather whispered. "He hasn't been in touch with anyone since your grandmother died." "Perry Hutchins," Lionel remembered. "They used to work together, but I don't know his number." Heather was already dialing the police. "Hello," she said, trying to sound calm. "I want to report a missing person. My grandfather, Ambrose Freeman, 68 years old, left the house last night and hasn't come back." She listened to the police officer's response, her face gradually lengthening. "But he's an elderly man. He has health problems. No, he's of sound mind." "Yes, I understand it's only been a short time, but—" She put down the phone and looked helplessly at Lionel. "They say they can't file a missing person report for an adult until 24 hours have passed, especially if there are no signs of foul play or if the person is mentally sound." "Damn it!" Lionel punched the wall. "I should have known. We waited too long to surprise him. He must have suspected something, overheard a snippet of conversation, and decided that we want to get rid of him," Heather finished, tears welling up in her eyes. "Poor Ambrose, we have to find him." "I'll call the coffee shop and tell them I won't be coming in today," Lionel said, already dialing the number. "We'll search the whole city for him." The taxi pulled up to Perry's house right on time. After saying goodbye to my friend and promising to return in a couple of hours, I got into the car and gave Lionel the address. On the way, I thought about what I would say to my grandson and his wife when we met again. Maybe I would never say anything. Maybe I would just disappear from their lives, as they wanted. To my surprise, when the taxi pulled up to the house, I saw that Lionel's car was still in the driveway. Strange. He should have left for the coffee shop by now. "Wait a minute," I said to the driver and dialed Perry's number. "Yes?" he answered after the second ring. "Perry, their car is still at home. Something's wrong. They should be at work at this time." "Maybe they have the day off. Or are they sick?" "No, Lionel said they were getting a new shipment of coffee today. He always checks the quality himself, and Heather does the bookkeeping at the flower shop on Tuesdays." "Well, maybe they—" Perry faltered, and I knew what he was thinking. "They're looking for me," I finished for him. Damn it, I didn't want them to worry. I just wanted to leave with some dignity. "Why don't you talk to them?" Perry suggested. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to get out of the taxi, go into the house, and explain myself to Lionel and Heather. But another part, the part that was deeply hurt, resisted. "No, I'm not ready to talk. I just want to get my things and my documents. I'll call you later." I hung up and asked the driver to take me to Central Park. I sat on a bench there for about an hour thinking about the situation. Then I called a taxi again and went to Lionel's house. This time the driveway was empty, which meant they had gone looking for me. I paid the driver and walked up to the house. I still had my keys, so I opened the front door without any trouble. Inside it was quiet, broken only by the ticking of an old clock in the living room. I went up to my room and looked around. Everything was just as I had left it the night before. The bed unmade, the closet open, a few books on the nightstand. I took a few remaining items from the shelf, an old hat that Lydia had given me, a pair of cufflinks that had belonged to my father, and a few other small items that were dear to my heart. Then I went to the dresser and pulled out the bottom drawer. There, under a pile of sweaters, was a folder with documents. I took it out and opened it, checking the contents, the contract for the sale of my house, bank statements showing the money that had been transferred, Lionel's receipt for the funds to start the business. Everything was there. I was about to leave when I noticed a piece of paper on the desk that hadn't been there before. It was a note from Lionel. "Grandpa, if you come back and read this, please call us. We are very worried. I don't know what you heard or thought, but we love you and never wanted you to leave. Please come home, Lionel." I stared at the note for a long time, feeling something tighten in my chest. Maybe I had misunderstood everything. Maybe Perry was right and I had only heard what I was afraid to hear. But no, I clearly heard the irritation in Heather's voice when she asked, "How long is he going to stay here?" It couldn't have been a mistake. I folded the note and put it in my pocket. Then I went downstairs, intending to leave, but stopped in the living room. On the mantelpiece were framed photographs. Lionel and Heather on their wedding day, my son Thomas with his wife, me with little Lionel in my arms. So many memories. Leaving the house, I carefully locked the door and called a taxi. I had to get back to Perry and think about what to do next. On the one hand, I felt guilty for causing Lionel and Heather to worry. On the other hand, resentment still burned in my heart. In the taxi, I took out my phone and saw 27 missed calls from Lionel and Heather. They were really looking for me. They were worried, but that didn't change the fact that they were tired of me being in their house. When I got back to Perry's, I found him in the garage tinkering with some old radio. "You're back?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. "How did it go?" I told him about the trip, about Lionel's note, about the missed calls. "They're looking for you," Perry said when I finished. "They're worried. Maybe you should call them after all?" I shook my head. "Not now. I need time to think. And I don't want to go back to them only to hear a week later that it's time for me to move out. Better to start a new life right away, on my own." "How do you imagine that?" Perry looked at me skeptically. "Where will you live? How will you support yourself?" "I have my pension," I replied. "It's not much, but it's enough for a modest life. Maybe I'll rent a room somewhere, or even a small apartment." "Starting from scratch at your age?" Perry shook his head. "Ambrose, are you sure this is what you want?" "No, I'm not sure. I'd like to go back to my old house on Cedar Street, sit on the porch in the evenings and watch the sun go down. I wish Lydia were here, that Thomas and his wife hadn't died in that accident. I wish things were different. But life is what it is." "I have to keep some dignity," I said finally. "I can't go back to where I'm not wanted." "Are you sure they don't want you there?" Perry insisted. "From what you've told me, they've been looking everywhere for you." "Maybe they're just ashamed," I replied. "They didn't want me to leave like that, in the middle of the night. They wanted to do things properly." Perry sighed and put his hand on my shoulder. "You know, Ambrose, sometimes pride is a bad advisor. But it's your life, it's your decision. Just remember, youth doesn't last forever. One day Lionel will grow old and he may find himself in the same situation. Do you want him to remember you as the man who chose pride over family?" His words struck a chord deep inside me. I remembered little Lionel, sitting on my lap listening to stories about my youth, how he looked at me with wide eyes, absorbing every word. I was his hero back then. Who am I to him now? A burden to be gotten rid of? "I need to think," I said finally. "Can I stay with you for a couple more days?" "Sure," Perry nodded. "Stay as long as you need to, just maybe you should call them? At least let them know you're okay. They're worried sick." I nodded, promising nothing. Then I went to the room Perry had given me, sat down on the bed, and took out my phone. 27 missed calls had turned into 32, plus a dozen messages I didn't bother reading. My finger hovered over the call button. I could call Lionel right now. tell him I was fine, that I just needed some time to think. But something held me back, a mixture of pride, resentment, and fear. Fear of hearing relief in his voice that the problem had solved itself. In the end, I put the phone down. Not now. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe when the pain wasn't quite so sharp. I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling. Outside, evening was falling, the shadows lengthening, and Perry's house was growing quiet. I thought about Lionel and Heather, about their search, about their worry. I thought about my old home, about the new life I might have to start. I thought about pride and forgiveness, about family and loneliness. And somewhere between sleep and wakefulness, a thought occurred to me. What if I was wrong after all? What if Heather's words had a completely different meaning? What if I had heard only what I feared most, that I was useless, a burden? But before I could dwell on the thought, sleep washed over me like a heavy wave. The morning at Perry Hutchins' house began with the smell of freshly brewed coffee and fried bacon. I woke up with a heavy head, having tossed and turned all night, thinking about the situation and my escape. Maybe I really had misunderstood everything. I went down to the kitchen where Perry was already making breakfast. "Decided what you're going to do next?" he asked, setting a plate of scrambled eggs in front of me. "Yeah," I replied, sipping my coffee. "I'm going to Lionel's house while they're at work. I want to get the rest of the documents for the house we sold. I need proof of how the money from the sale was used." Perry frowned. "Are you sure that's a good idea? What if they're home? It's Wednesday. Lionel is always at the coffee shop early in the morning. It's delivery day. And Heather is teaching her flower arranging class. The house should be empty. And you don't want to just talk to them." Perry looked at me doubtfully. "No," I replied firmly. "I need the facts first." After breakfast, I called a taxi. When I pulled up to Lionel's house, I checked carefully. There were no cars in sight. That meant they were indeed at work, or, more likely, looking for me. I entered the house using my key. Going up to my room, I grabbed a few more personal items, an old hat Lydia had given me, my father's cufflinks. Then I took a folder with the house sale documents out of the dresser drawer and checked its contents. The purchase agreement, bank statements, Lionel's receipt for the funds. As I was heading for the door, I noticed a stack of papers on the coffee table in the living room. Lionel and Heather didn't usually leave documents lying around. Heather was very organized and hated clutter. Curiosity got the better of me, and I went over to take a look. They were real estate documents, the purchase agreement for the apartment on Maple Street. The name Lionel Freeman was listed as the buyer. I continued looking through the papers and found bank statements showing large sums transferred to the real estate agency's account. Next to them was a repair estimate. Someone, judging by the handwriting, Heather, had made notes in the margins. Wider doorways, handrails in the bathroom, emergency call button, adaptations for an elderly person. For me? I turned the page and saw a sketch of the interior. A living room with a large rocking chair by the window, just like my favorite chair in the old house. Bookshelves along the walls. I've always loved to read. A coffee table with a chessboard, my lifelong passion. What was this? Lionel and Heather had bought an apartment. For me. But why? Did they want to move me out because I was in their way? Or was it a gift, a way of thanking me for helping with the business? I remembered Heather's annoyed voice. "How long is he going to live here?" Now that phrase took on a whole new meaning. Maybe she wasn't asking how long I would be living in their house, but how long the renovations would take. I gathered all the documents and put them in my folder. I needed to figure out Lionel and Heather's true motives. If this apartment was just a polite way of getting me out of their house, then I was right to leave on my own. But if they really wanted to give me a gift out of gratitude, when I returned to Perry, I showed him the documents I had found. "It looks like Lionel bought an apartment," I said. "And judging by everything, it's for me." Perry studied the papers carefully. All these notes about handrails, wide doors, a call button, This is specifically for an elderly person. For you, Ambrose. But it could be a polite way of kicking me out of their house, I objected. Perry looked at me in bewilderment. They spent a fortune. Thought of every little detail from the width of the doors to your favorite armchair, and you think they want to get rid of you. If they wanted that, it would be easier to just say, "Grandpa, we need more personal space." I was silent, digesting his words. Maybe he was right. Maybe I really had misunderstood everything. What about Heather's comment, "How long is he going to live here?" I asked. "Are you sure she was talking about you?" Perry asked. Maybe she was talking about the renovation. Like, how long will the apartment renovation take? That hadn't occurred to me. What if Heather wasn't asking how long I would be living in their house, but how long the renovation would take? That would explain her irritation. Renovations are always stressful, especially when they take a long time. I don't know, I admitted. Maybe you're right. Then you need to talk to them, Perry said. They're going crazy with worry, and you're sitting here wondering. Meanwhile, Lionel sat in his coffee shop, staring blankly at the wall. Customers came and went. Baristas took orders, but he didn't notice anything, lost in his thoughts about me. "Lionel?" Heather's voice snapped him out of his trance. "I called all the hospitals. No elderly men matching his description have been reported." Lionel nodded, unable to find the words. They had been looking for me for 2 days, checking all the places I might be. Parks, the library, even my old house on Cedar Street. "I don't understand," Lionel said, clutching his cup of cold coffee. "Where could he have gone? He has no one but us." Heather sat down across from her husband, her eyes red from lack of sleep and tears. "I keep thinking about what he might have heard, what I said. How long will he be living here? If he only heard that phrase, without the context. He might think we want to get rid of him," Lionel finished. "How ironic. We tried so hard to surprise him, and now, maybe we should have just told him about the apartment right away." "I suggested that," Heather reminded him quietly. "But you wanted to surprise him so he wouldn't worry about the repairs, the details. And instead we lost him." Lionel slammed his fist on the table. "I'm an idiot. I should have thought about his feelings. He must have noticed our whispering, our secret conversations. We were so caught up in preparing the surprise that we didn't notice how excluded he felt from the family." Heather covered his hand with hers. "We'll find him, Lionel. He couldn't have just disappeared. What if something happened to him?" Lionel's voice was filled with fear. "He's not young. He has blood pressure problems. If he's out there alone, without his medication..." Heather squeezed his hand tighter. "Don't think about that. He's a strong old man and he's smart. He knows how to take care of himself." Lionel nodded, trying to convince himself of her words, but he couldn't shake his uneasiness. He remembered all the moments when he had felt like an outsider in their home. Their whispers, their silence when he entered the room, their secretive phone calls. "You know," he said after a long silence, "when Grandpa sold his house and moved in with us, I was so grateful to him for his help that I didn't think about how hard it must have been for him to give up his own home, his independence. He was always so proud. He never asked for help, always tried to manage on his own. And now he had to live with his grandson, depend on us. He loves you," Heather said softly. "He did it out of love." "And how did I repay him?" Lionel asked bitterly. "Instead of being open and honest, I played mysterious, planned a surprise. And he must have thought he was a burden to us, that we wanted to get rid of him." Heather lowered her eyes, feeling guilty. "I'm to blame too. Sometimes I was impatient with him. You know how stubborn he can be sometimes, and his habit of showing up when we're talking." "He's not eavesdropping," Lionel objected. "He's just afraid of being excluded from our lives. He lost his wife, his son, his home. We're all he has left." Heather nodded, swallowing back tears. "I know. And I love him too, despite all his quirks. He's become like a grandfather to me. I just sometimes forget what it's like to be old, lonely and dependent on others. Lionel looked at his wife with gratitude. Despite all the difficulties of living with an elderly person, she never complained, never made him feel like he was a burden. "We have to find him," Lionel said, "and when we do, I'll tell him how much we love him, how grateful we are for everything he has done for us, and that this apartment is not a way to get rid of him but a gift, a sign of our gratitude and love." Heather smiled through her tears. "We'll find him, we will." I sat in Perry's room, going over the documents I had found again and again. The renovation estimates, interior sketches, the purchase agreement. Everything indicated that the apartment had been prepared especially for me, taking into account all my needs and habits. But one detail bothered me. Why did they hide this from me? If they wanted to give me a gift, why didn't they just say so? Maybe they did want to evict me, but were trying to do it gently, without hurting my feelings. Perry was right. The only way to find out the truth was to talk to Lionel and Heather directly, but I wasn't ready for that conversation. I wasn't ready to see disappointment in their eyes, or worse, pity. I gathered my documents into a folder and went downstairs. Perry was sitting in the living room reading the newspaper. "I've made up my mind," I said. "I'm going to Lionel's coffee shop. I'll talk to him. I'll find out what this apartment means, a gift or a way to get rid of me." Perry put down the newspaper. "That's the right decision. Do you want me to go with you?" "No," I replied. "I have to do this myself." I called a taxi, and 20 minutes later, I was standing in front of the Inspiration coffee shop. Through the large windows, I could see Lionel behind the counter. He looked exhausted, pale face, dark circles under his eyes, hunched shoulders. Heather was standing next to him, saying something to him, her hand on his shoulder. They didn't look like people who wanted to get rid of an old relative. They looked like people who had lost someone important and were suffering. The bell above the door of the Inspiration coffee shop jingled as I entered. Several customers turned around but quickly returned to their conversations and cups of coffee. I stood in the doorway, clutching a folder of documents, and looked around the room. Lionel was behind the counter preparing another order. He looked exhausted. Pale face, dark circles under his eyes, hunched shoulders. Next to him, Heather was wiping down the coffee machine, saying something quietly to him. They didn't notice me right away. I could have just stood there and watched them, but there was no time for hesitation. I walked decisively toward the counter, feeling my heart pound in my chest. Heather saw me first. She froze with the rag in her hand, her eyes wide with surprise. "Ambrose?" she whispered, and there was so much disbelief in her voice that I felt ashamed of what I was doing. Lionel turned and stared at me, as if he had seen a ghost. The cup he was holding slipped from his hands and shattered on the floor, but he didn't seem to notice. "Grandpa?" His voice trembled, and I saw tears in his eyes. "Is it really you?" I nodded, unable to speak. A lump in my throat prevented me from speaking. Lionel jumped out from behind the counter and rushed toward me, hugging me so tightly that it was difficult to breathe. I could feel his shoulders shaking. He was crying, unashamed of the other patrons and staff. "You're alive," he whispered. "You're safe. We were so worried. Where were you? Why did you leave? We were frantic looking for you." I awkwardly patted him on the back, not knowing what to say. My anger, my resentment, it all suddenly seemed so petty, so insignificant in the face of his genuine joy. Heather came over too, her eyes filled with tears. "Ambrose," she said, "thank God you're okay." I gathered my strength and stepped away from Lionel, holding the folder of documents in my hands. "I found this," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The apartment documents, and I need an explanation." Lionel and Heather exchanged glances, and I saw a mixture of relief and embarrassment in their eyes. "Let's talk somewhere else," Lionel said quietly. "Let's go to my office." He turned to one of the baristas. "Jake, keep an eye on the bar. We'll be in the office." We crossed the room into a small room at the back of the coffee shop. It was Lionel's office, compact but cozy, with a desk, a few chairs, and photographs on the walls. In one of them, Lydia and I were holding newborn Lionel in our arms, a photograph I thought was lost. Lionel closed the door and invited me to sit down. Heather perched on the edge of the desk. They looked at me with such concern, such love, that I felt ashamed of my suspicions again. "So," I began, placing the folder on the desk, "I want to know the truth. What does this apartment mean? Do you want me to move out? Have I become a burden to you?" Lionel and Heather exchanged glances again, and this time there was confusion in their eyes. "What?" Lionel shook his head. "Grandpa, what are you talking about? We never wanted you to move out. This apartment is a gift to you." "A gift?" I looked at them skeptically. "Then why did you hide it from me? Why all the secretive conversations, the whispering that stopped when I entered the room?" "We wanted to surprise you," Heather replied. "You've done so much for us, Ambrose. You sold your house so Lionel could start his business. You've supported us in everything. We wanted to thank you, give you your own space, your freedom. But I heard you ask, how long is he going to live here?" I looked Heather straight in the eyes. There was irritation in your voice. "I thought you meant how much longer I would be living in your house." Heather covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes widening with understanding. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You misunderstood. I was talking about the renovations in the apartment. I was asking how much longer the builders would be working. They promised to finish in 2 weeks, but it was taking longer, and I was worried we wouldn't be ready for your birthday." "For my birthday?" I asked. "Yes," Lionel nodded. "We wanted to give you the apartment for your birthday. Completely finished, renovated, furnished, with everything you need." I was silent, digesting what I had heard. So all this time they had been preparing a gift for me, and I thought they wanted to get rid of me. What an old fool I am. "Why did you leave, Grandpa?" Lionel asked quietly. "Why didn't you talk to us?" I sighed, feeling the weight of resentment and suspicion lift from my shoulders, giving way to shame and remorse. "I only heard part of your conversation. I decided I was a burden to you. Now that the business is thriving, you want to live your life without an old man getting in the way." "Grandpa," Lionel sat down next to me, taking my hands in his. "You have never been a burden to us, and you never will be. You are part of our family. We love you." "Then why didn't you tell me about the apartment right away?" I asked. "Why all the secrecy?" Heather and Lionel exchanged glances again, this time guiltily. "It was my idea," Lionel admitted. "I wanted it to be a real surprise. You know, like in the movies, where they blindfold you and take you to a new house and then say, 'Surprise, it's yours. I thought you'd like it.'" "I suggested telling you right away," Heather added. "But Lionel was so excited about the surprise. He even planned a red ribbon on the door and everything." I looked at them, young, enthusiastic, sincerely wanting to make me happy, and my heart filled with warmth and gratitude. "I'm sorry, Grandpa," Lionel said. "We should have thought about your feelings, to realize that our secret conversations might look suspicious." "No," I shook my head. "I'm the one who should be apologizing. I doubted you, your love. Instead of talking to you directly, I ran away like a hurt child." "Where have you been for the last 2 days?" Heather asked. "We searched the whole town, called hospitals, even the police." "Perry Hutchins," I replied. "We worked together many years ago. He took me in, though he tried to convince me to talk to you." "Perry Hutchins," Lionel repeated. "I should have guessed. We'll have to thank him for taking care of you." There was a pause. I looked at the photos on the walls, Lionel and Heather on their wedding day, me with little Lionel in my arms, my son Thomas with his wife. So many memories, so much love. And I almost ruined it all with my unfounded suspicions. "I want to see the apartment," I said finally. Lionel and Heather lit up. "Of course," Lionel exclaimed. The renovations aren't quite finished, but the main work is done. We can go right now." "Will Jake be okay without you?" Heather asked. "Of course," Lionel said, already getting up, ready to show me my new home. He's a great manager. We left the coffee shop and got into Lionel's car. On the way, they told me about the apartment, how they had looked for the right place, how they had planned the renovations, how they had chosen the furniture based on my preferences. "We wanted you to have your own space but still be close to us," Lionel explained. "This apartment is only 3 blocks from our house. You can come over any time, and we'll visit you, but you'll have your own space, your own independence. We know how much you miss your old home," Heather added. "How important it is for you to have your own space. We wanted to give that back to you." I listened to them, and my heart filled with gratitude. They understood my needs and my desires so well. They thought about me and cared about me, and I doubted their love. We pulled up to a small but well-kept apartment building on Maple Street. It was a modern building but not a faceless high-rise, only 4 stories, with balconies and large windows. "Your apartment is on the 2nd floor," Lionel said, helping me out of the car. "There's an elevator so you won't have to climb any stairs." We entered the building. The lobby was clean and bright, with paintings on the walls and potted flowers. Lionel pressed the elevator button, and a few seconds later we were on our way up to the 2nd floor. The apartment was at the end of the corridor. Lionel took out his keys and opened the door, letting me in first. "Welcome to your new home, Grandpa," he said with a smile. I entered and stood still in the doorway looking around. The apartment was spacious and bright. Large windows looked out onto a quiet street lined with trees. The living room was furnished exactly as I had seen in the sketches. A large rocking chair by the window, bookshelves along the walls, a coffee table with a chessboard. "This is—" I couldn't find the words to express my feelings. "We know you like to read by the window," Heather said, pointing to the chair, "and we put in a special reading lamp so you don't strain your eyes." Lionel led me further, showing me the kitchen, compact but functional, with new appliances and a convenient layout. "Everything is at a comfortable height for you," he explained, "and we've installed special handles on the cabinets so they're easy to open." The bedroom was bright and cozy, with a large bed and bedside tables. There were photos on the walls. Me with Lydia, our wedding, Thomas's birth, Lionel at different stages of his life. "We made copies of your photos," Heather explained. "We wanted you to feel at home." The bathroom was equipped with special handrails near the bathtub and toilet, non-slip flooring, and a wide door so that a walker could be brought in if ever needed. "And we have a little surprise for you," Lionel said, opening the door to another room. "We know how much you loved your garden in your old house. It was a small room with floor-to-ceiling windows opening onto a balcony. There were pots of plants, a small table, and a chair. This is your winter garden," Lionel explained. "Here you can grow flowers and herbs." Heather picked out plants that didn't require much care but would still be pleasing to the eye. I walked around the apartment, touching things, looking at details, and my heart was overflowing with gratitude. They had thought of everything, my hobbies, my habits, my needs. This apartment wasn't just a place to live, it was a home, created with love, especially for me. "Do you like it?" Heather asked when we returned to the living room. There was concern in her voice. "If anything's wrong, we can change it." I sat down in the rocking chair, feeling how perfectly it fit my body. It was just like my old chair in the house on Cedar Street. "It's perfect," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you." "You've already thanked us, Grandpa," Lionel said, sitting down on the sofa across from me. "Everything we have, this coffee shop, our home, our life, is thanks to you. You sold your house to help me start this business. You supported us through everything. This apartment is just a small part of what we want to do for you." "We love you, Ambrose," Heather added, sitting down next to Lionel, "and we want you to be happy." I looked at them, young, full of enthusiasm and love, and I realized what a fool I had been to doubt them. They didn't want to get rid of me, they wanted to give me a better life while maintaining our family bond. "I love you too," I said, tears welling up in my eyes, "and I'm so ashamed that I doubted you, that I doubted your love, that I ran away like a hurt child instead of talking to you directly." "We're to blame too," Lionel shook his head. "We should have been more open, told you about our plans, but we got so caught up in the idea of a surprise that we didn't think about how our secrecy might look to you. Let's just say we've all learned our lesson." Heather took Lionel's hand. "No more secrets, no more half-truths, only honesty and openness." I nodded, feeling the weight of the last few days lift from my shoulders. The misunderstanding was resolved. The hurt was gone. All that remained was love and gratitude. "When can I move in?" I asked. Lionel and Heather exchanged glances, this time joyful. "The repairs should be finished in 3 days," Lionel replied. "Then a couple more days for cleaning and finishing touches. So, next weekend?" "Sounds great," I smiled. "But let's go home now. I should call Perry and tell him everything's okay."
"And thank him for taking you in," Heather added. "Maybe we should invite him over for dinner."
"Great idea," I agreed.
We left the apartment and Lionel locked the door behind us. Before walking away, I looked back at my new home. My heart filled with warmth at the thought that soon I would be living here, independent, but not alone.
With my own space, but close to my family. 2 weeks later, I moved into my new apartment. Lionel and Heather helped me move my things, arrange them, and make the place cozy. On moving day, they threw a small party with champagne, cake, and a little red ribbon on the door, which I ceremoniously cut. Perry was also invited, and we sat on the balcony for a long time, talking about life, family, how important it is to appreciate your loved ones and not give in to fears and doubts. Life was good. I had found my space and my independence, but I hadn't lost touch with my family. Lionel stops by every morning before work and we have breakfast together. Heather taught me how to use a smartphone, and now we are constantly in touch, exchanging messages, photos, and video calls. On Sundays, I have lunch at their house, and sometimes they come to mine. I cook old family recipes that I remember from Lydia's time. My life has changed, and I am grateful for that. I realize that love isn't measured by how many square feet you share. It's measured by care, attention, and a willingness to understand and accept. I also realize that sometimes what seems like the end can actually be the beginning of something new and beautiful. You just need to open your heart and trust your loved ones. After all, what could be more important than a family that loves you for who you are, with all your quirks, fears, and flaws? A family that is willing to compromise so that everyone is comfortable. And sitting in my rocking chair by the window, watching the sunset, I feel like the happiest person in the world. I have my own home, my own independence, and I have a family that is always there for me, even if we are physically in different houses. What else do I need to be happy at 68?